Welcome to the revolution in the airwaves. It's The Cure with Scotty and Sully, where we don't just talk about the medical industry, we transform it. This is The Cure with Scotty and Sully, where we don't just cover excellence, we create it.
Right? Hey, welcome to The Cure with Scotty and Sully. Another great episode. Scotty, we recently had a pretty fun interview with the mad Italian, Giulio.
He's very nice.
He's very nice, huh? What'd you learn from Giulio?
I think his technique on starting a cold call, getting what the next question is, which is, identifying the two problems and then getting an example. That whole line of questioning was amazing to me. And it's stuff you'd kind of do anyways, but when he lays it out into a format, it's and the fact that he's, as an Italian, his favorite wine is vodka.
That was a great line. That was great. Well, listen, we are pumped. Let's say we had a special episode because today we're going to peel back the layers of the topic of health insurance, talk a little bit about the industry. And so we are pumped. We got Brian Cuddeback with Cigna. He's VP of Sales at Cigna. So we're going to dive into what really goes on behind the scenes. We're going to uncover the motivations that drive decisions beyond the bottom line. This is the insurance world is one that people have their own perceptions of, but I don't think really understand. And I say that even in our industry, the healthcare industry, we don't really know what motivates or what's important to the insurance agencies or insurance companies. There's often this perception that, they're the ones making all the money. And so our man Brian's going to kind of help unveil a little bit about the insurance world and hopefully it'll the knowledge and skill it gives you make you better at serving your healthcare systems, your IDNs, et cetera. So Brian, thanks for joining us, my friend.
Yeah, my pleasure. Happy to be here.
Good. So tell the folks a little bit about what you do with the behemoth Cigna.
What I do. So for coming up on just shy of the past 19 years, I've been here. I've led a sales team here in Connecticut. I'd say, so that's sales and distribution, 33 years in the business, last 19 here inside of Cigna. So I'm one of those quintessential carrier guys. Interactions on my part there are really mobilizing a team for new client group acquisition. So employers that purchase insurance on behalf of their employees. That's the American distribution system. Have some responsibility for new client acquisition as well as client retention. As we get into all of the consumer dynamics that exist with the interaction of that person who's looking to get care for a specific episode, an annual physical, all the way through the gamut.
Got it.
Love it. Brian, talk to me a little bit. Innovation is obviously a buzzword that's used these days, probably overused if I don't miss my guess, but how does that play kind of in the Cigna world with innovation and, any recent partnerships that you guys have worked on where innovation has come into play?
Well, I think, that could probably take up the entire podcast. I'd start this way. Inside of Cigna, think of that 70,000+ employees, a Fortune, depending on where the stock closed yesterday. Let's call it a Fortune 11 to 13 company, right? So this is a big company. How does that bureaucracy, as you start out, create very tangible innovation? And that innovation, I think, as I try and see it, is things that make the complex simple to the consumer of healthcare. So when I think about innovation, I think about things like what are we hearing and reading about in today's world. We have all the GLP-1s that are out there, from how did Oprah get her body back by simply taking a shot, direct to consumer advertising. you put all that together in the form of, there's a medication out there that may help me lose weight so I don't have to diet and I don't have to exercise. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And the answer is it's both. Fundamentally, how do you bring that down into a program that the consumer can say, I need to modify my behavior and possibly engage with a pharmaceutical offering in an effort to lower my body weight? And how could that be a good thing? So innovation around product and service, I think, is out there. There's also some really interesting stuff that we're going through and have been going through for, we released it actually right at that point of the pandemic. So call it 3+, almost 4 years in, around emerging things with gene therapies, one-time curative episodes of care. Think of that as a shot or transfusion, if you will, that alters your body, right? One-time curative gene therapy that can modify and change your life, save your life.
Wow.
And would you be interested in that? And then on the other side, you've got to delicately balance the latest one that just came out yesterday. Forgive me because I am not totally up to speed. The cost of that one-time gene therapy is $4.25 million.
Oh my gosh.
But it could change your baby's life, as in that baby may actually grow up and be a productive member of society, right? So it's that cost versus service. Yeah. Should everything be included in my health plan or not? That's where we do a lot of, I was going to say battle, but a lot of work inside of bringing goods and service to the consumer at the same time, trying to balance affordability all in, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think our listener, Sully, would be highly interested in what Brian just said there, in the sense of you guys thinking about healthcare from that standpoint. I think when most folks look at it, at kind of what you guys do, is they just think, oh, this is my insurer and they're a business. And so it's real interesting to me to see, you're actually behind the scenes trying to work on better ways to give care and services that help your insured folks out there. So that's I don't think even my mindset goes there, but it's so true. It's why you see payers getting involved in buying up practices and health systems and different, and trying to manage those and run those from a business standpoint.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Hey, Brian, where are those decisions made? So take us into those rooms or that network where you have to make the decision of the patient outcomes and the benefits that come from that are weighed against the cost.
Yeah. So above my pay grade, I'll take the easy way out in terms of my first response there. But I would look at it, maybe I'd give you two aspects to it. I'd look at it a little bit like it is a business. We are a for-profit company. But in terms of those rooms, I think it's not unlike any other business. You don't have an infinite supply of capital at your disposal. So as you start on the highest level inside of board and the true senior leadership team, here is the amount of capital that we're going to use to fund the portfolio of products. Right. So if you think about true senior leadership on sort of the product side and the business side, what programs, what things are they going to look to fund for this year, the next year, and the commitment of capital on that side? I think that's one of the rooms that you're referring to. If there's another room out there, it is just that Cigna as a health services organization. Think of that as the collection of doctors, nurses, PAs, and specialists on that practitioner side saying, we are grounded in the policies that we set. They're all based on evidence, the evidence-based medicine of going. So something that's new to market and unfounded, of course, would have to be approved by federal oversight boards like the FDA, et cetera. But that's another room is here's a shiny penny, but what is the efficacy of treatment and that cost balance? That's where I'd rely heavily on the clinical side of things, saying here's the evidence that supports why this is not deemed experimental. I'm sure there's a good number of listeners that you have who sat in a doctor's office and heard something like, well, I really want to try this, but Cigna or the carrier won't cover it. There's usually some good foundation to, we don't see the support of the cost all in to the consumer and or their plan sponsor to the benefit. That is a push and pull that I think we deal with just about every day. So there are the two rooms I think of: funding a portfolio, and then where is the evidence, what trials are out there, all of that intellect around studies, clinical trials, et cetera, that we base all our policy decisions on.
Yeah. Well, and as you say this, I imagine, I'm imagining someone in their exam room, and they're asking for a certain procedure, or they saw a commercial, and the doctor says, well, it's not covered. So it's the physician's or the clinician's job to explain why it's not covered, which must be difficult for a Cigna because you're not there to defend it, right? Is that a concern, right? Because now this perception of, the mothership, the Cigna, it's hard to defend.
It is. I think that's definitely dynamic, right? There are several relationships that are coveted inside of the overall ecosystem as I think about it. And right at the top of the list, and will never be anywhere but the top of the list, is I just had my doctor tell me this. That you can never try and challenge or get in the way of, right? That is the most coveted relationship because that doctor has been trained. If I'm seeing him or her, they are clearly the best and most qualified. And I'm not there to disrupt that, but I'm there to suggest that sometimes we may have more information or other thoughts on next course of action that, to be a well-informed consumer, we'd almost ask that you pause and give thought to. Do you need to go right into surgery for something, or is there a less intrusive, higher quality, more convenient step that you could take before that? Physical therapy instead of straight into surgery to fix a shoulder or a hip, for example. But that typically will come down on just, my doctor told me I need surgery, I'm calling to get my surgery approved, right? It's sort of that delicate balance that I think goes on each and every day.
Well, how do you explain the why to them? How do you get to these physicians to explain how the folks in your health services department came to those conclusions? Right, because no doubt you believe it as the organization. You're saying, listen, these are really smart people who we trust, who we believe are thinking somewhat independently, but there's no consistency out there in the market. To your point, you may have the one doctor say, hey, listen, I'm an orthopedic guy. Anybody who walks in with a mild knee pain, they're getting the damn surgery, right? That meniscus will be fixed. In fact, it happened to me, right? I went in, I had a sore knee from golfing, and the guy played around with a little bit, and he says, hey, you need an MRI. Well, guess who's paying for the MRI? I mean, after my deductible, right? But now that costs the system money. I went home, and I was traveling, so I didn't have time to schedule the surgery. And guess what? The knee got better. And so probably didn't need the MRI, certainly didn't need the surgery. But I think that was an example of there's no consistency how some will think outside of what's maybe where they're going to make their money, because they're still somewhat fee for service, right? They're getting paid for doing this. How do you spread the message to everybody that there needs to be consistency? Otherwise, there's that, there's the mothership, and then there's these Wild West folks. That's got to be a hard thing to manage.
It is, but I think if you rely on the science itself, I'll be totally honest with you. I'll reach over here and say, how do we get the consumer, the patient, in this case, more involved in it? It fundamentally probably just comes down to the device, the cell phone, the smartphone that everybody is walking into. You know, it almost goes back to, I guess, as we covered, innovation, the amount of funding or portfolio funding that goes into pushing information, offering information under the guise of being transparent about something. Hey, Brian, you were told that you have a torn or a slight tear in your meniscus. Did you have a discussion with your orthopedic surgeon about what your options are? Or were you simply told, check with the person out at the front desk, we'll get you scheduled for surgery? There may be options out there. That's the first entree that comes into. I also then get into the really delicate piece in terms of this patient to doctor relationship of how do you mildly suggest in some of the outlier cases that your physician, who you trust, has done 10 of these surgeries in the last year, let's just make something up, versus, and there's been a readmission rate or a higher than normal infection rate on something on the 10 that they've done versus someone who's down the street, maybe a few miles away, who does 1,000 of these a year with no infection or readmission, right? It's that full transparency around this is your need. Now you have some choices as to who can provide the service, at what cost, and how intrusive, how much recovery. That's a push and pull of what we do each and every day.
Yeah. You know, another topic we probably could spend a whole conversation on. We talk about value-based care here a lot, but, you know, value-based purchasing. Can you talk a little bit about how Cigna worked with providers and then ultimately how that affects the health systems out there from a value-based purchasing standpoint?
Yeah, sure. And I think, Scott, I agree with you. That's so first and foremost, there are a lot of different definitions around value-based care. What does it mean? So I'll come in with what I'm hearing you say in terms of my initial reaction. So to me, value-based care is about an episode of treatment that results in a successful or the most successful outcome. The meniscus, now the knee doesn't hurt anymore. At what cost of care, total medical cost, if you will, as well as the quality that was derived from it. It was, in fact, healed, repaired, fixed. It doesn't hurt anymore. So value-based to me starts really on the forefront of, we believe that based on a lot of data across a little over 16 million Americans covered under a Cigna plan, just from a medical standpoint, the data that we see adjusted for geographic sensitivities. Things don't cost the same in Kansas City as they do in downtown Manhattan, et cetera. But we believe that a meniscus might have a cost of care of X and a recovery time of Y. We enter into arrangements with physicians, medical providers that say, hey, if you're willing to come along with us and we try and eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse from the system and deliver quality care, how about for every meniscus, every Brian that calls in, we'll agree to an overall rate on that, a rate of reimbursement and payment for the desired outcome. And if you can do it for less with the same or better quality, then we're willing to share in some of that cost reimbursement with you. Value-based says achieve high quality at reduced cost. There is potentially reimbursement in that for you in the provider contract that we hold with some of our doctors. Inside of the technology, that first advancement that I thought that started to bring the consumer, the carrier, the healthcare provider back into a convening moment was the electronic medical record, the EMR, the EHR, whatever. Here's a central repository of my chart that both the clinical side of the carrier can look at. It's that file that sat in the doctor's office way back when, your patient file, so that everybody was looking at the data that had blood pressure and blood work and all of those things. That's where the transformation of technology started 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I think comes then all the way out into what we're hearing about today. Technology in the form of AI and generative AI will lead us into, when you pick up the phone and call Cigna, you can call us 24/7. So when you have the time and the moment to say, I've got a question on my care, I've got a question on a bill, you come in. It's probably not uncommon that one of our care coordinators, customer service representatives have to go and pull up your record in one system and then go and interact with, could it be 3, could it be 10 other systems to try and solve a problem or give you an answer. Technology, as it's going through, using artificial intelligence with, hey, we've had 10 of these questions. Here are the 6 different systems that have to be queried to get a simple answer back. Computers can do that in seconds. Human beings can do that in minutes. I think some would argue and say hours. There's a whole spectrum of technology that I think sits inside of that.
Yeah. And that's EMR. I know for a lot of my listeners, Sully's too, but a lot of mine has been just a nightmare trying to get that into, the providers and, the different issues they've dealt with. And I think that's kind of started to settle out. But when I think about 10 years ago, what you were talking about 10, 15 years ago, when it first started coming in, and it seemed like there were 100 EMR companies that were trying to come to market. I think like everything else, that happens, and then consolidation, and you end up with kind of the big 3, like in every other industry. But I want to shift a little bit to the patient experience and how you're working with providers to create a smoother patient experience out there. And for the audience, sorry, we lost Sully. I don't know what happened to him. He's our producer, and he produced himself out of the show, apparently.
Yeah. So, Scott, let me make sure I get this one right as well, because I was jotting down just one note.
And I can re-ask it if you want me to.
Go ahead. Just re-ask it.
So I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about how you're collaborating as Cigna with the healthcare providers to make a smoother kind of patient experience for them. Are there any innovative models out there that you guys have or partnerships that you want to talk about with that?
Yeah. So if I start on the abstract, I'll just jot down a note, so I'll keep myself on topic too. So the U.S. domestic healthcare system is complex. Some could argue it's fragmented, it's siloed, or whatever. To really try and get at the consumer experience and bettering the consumer experience, it's about making the complex simple. And that's a challenge. I'm the first to admit that with what I see can go wrong. And when it goes wrong multiple times, then how do you fix that? But in essence, I go this way. Collaboration is probably the key word that I'd use to jump off of. We've been, even here, just in my state, we've been working on collaborating with the clinical side, the healthcare professionals, since 2008. We stood up some of our first collaborative efforts. These things have now grown and morphed, and I don't know anyone who's not talking about an accountable care organization,
right?
An
ACOs.
ACO,
Yep.
And any number of factions out there. Again, Cigna's been in that business since 2008, and that continues to grow. The essence of that is, I'd simplify it down to, it's the pushing and pulling of data. And it's really what started out as data and now data that leads to insights. Hey, Dr. Adams, you have 25 diabetic patients. Inside of those patients, we know there are 17 clinically accepted protocols that each of those diabetics should be going through. And our records indicate that you've only done 16 of the 17 across them. We want to share that with you. You come back and say, no, I think I've done all 17. I think I've only done 13, and here's why I didn't do. It's eliminating, it's getting that data shared in that environment, all under recommended courses, not a, hey, I want to say yes or no, but that sharing of the data and the insights that come out of that, so that when the patient actually comes in, it's, we're on track. Here's what can be scheduled next. Yes, a doctor is going to know what they want to do, but it's, again, reinforcing that with, we know the 17 accepted diabetic standards. Are we in agreement that we're on the 16th of 17, and 17 will take place in a month? So that's where it started. It has gone, it continues to iterate or evolve, I think, into that. But the essence of that is still collaboration. For these collaboratives that we have, we meet on pretty much a quarterly basis. I can talk about here in Connecticut, we have 7 of those collaborations. Some of those are hospitals and physicians as one big entity. Some are physician only. But in the real basic componentry of it, it's about the pushing and pulling of data and then sharing that across their patient base in an effort to drive lower total medical cost and higher quality of life for the customer, the consumer at the end of the day.
You know, we had I hosted a meeting here with my business partner last week where we had, we do about 8 to 10 meetings a year with health system executives on panels and speaking to national account execs that are calling on those health systems. We just started a new one where it's the ops folks in health systems meeting with the operation folks within Medtronic, J&J, the big manufacturers, to work on how do they get better at operations to take costs out of the system. And there were some great ideas that came from it, but we had one session where we had the supply chain / operations guy for lab for Mayo, who did a conversation with the operations vice president from Roche. And what you just talked about there was spot on to what made this work. They were transparent, and they shared data back and forth. And first and foremost, their teams are transparent. The Roche team is training the Mayo purchasing team and vice versa. And they work like they're one organization. And I think transparency and data are the two things that, obviously, I'm stating the obvious to everybody out there, but that's what's driving everything in our lives. One place we don't typically see transparency and great communication or collaboration is Washington, D.C. Talk a little bit about some policy change and how you guys navigate that, whether it's at the state level or whether it's national, and kind of how you work through that. You like that segue?
You guys don't like to tackle like the little yes and no questions here, do you? You like the tip of the iceberg, I guess I'd say.
Well, Brian, you're the tip of the spear, buddy.
Well,
what'd I miss?
Absolutely nothing. So you're just fine. policy change, I think, on a number of fronts. Let me give it just a little bit of thought. I mean, we alluded to it before. So the ACA is now 14 years old, right? We literally just 14 years old.
Yeah, its birthday was like last week, right?
Correct. Yeah. Exactly right. My, oh my, I remember trying to swallow that 14 years ago with the initial 700 pages that came out that really just tried to get some of the essential health benefits guaranteed. If you're going to buy a health plan, it's got to have this well woman care, no more pre-existing conditions. I mean, we have come a long way from that, but that was all federally driven.
Right.
I'm very thankful that inside of Cigna, as well as any other carrier, third-party administrator, you have a lot of resource that is dedicated to compliance for a lot of reason. When you get something like the Affordable Care Act that comes through and the years, think about it where we are in terms of the Cadillac tax that still continues to be deferred, but what that meant 12 years ago when it was only a year or two away from sort of coming into fruition. So there's absolutely a federal level. What I see a little bit more and feel is on the federal level, you usually have a year to 3 to get your systems and your operations in place. There's a testing period, all of those things around coming. On the state level, you may have something that comes out of committee, passes that last night of session, and by the way, it's enacted or effective the next day, and you're reacting to it. So it feels to me, if I think about even what's going through our legislature right now, there's a couple of things that I'm keeping an eye on, which in abstract, I don't go to the left or the right from a political standpoint in terms of where I share my own views on it. But there are things that we're keeping an eye on right now that could come out and be effective for January 2025. And they likely won't figure that out until the fall. When the House bill comes out and actually is signed and enacted, and then you have a month or two to get in. So it's ever changing. I think there is a lot of focus both on the federal and state level right now on, I'll say, prescription drugs in general. When you think about the pill, the injection, the inhaler, whatever, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, your pharmaceutical piece used to be, 10, 12% of your overall health plan spend. Now it can be 25 to 35%, especially given just all of those specialty medications that are out there, right? Whether delivered to you via or within the hospital, or you can self-inject at home. That's where the cost is increasing at a dramatic rate. It is helping. So specialty pharmacy, as that increases, maybe your core medical spend is decreasing because you're treating a condition. But all of those things work in tandem, and legislatures on a state and federal level try and address it, just as we try and bring that same, even to what we were talking about before, in a collaborative standpoint. Here's what we're seeing. Here's the data. Here are the programs and innovations we're thinking about to address it, all the while remaining compliant on both the state and federal level. So never a dull moment on that side of the house either.
Same here. Never a dull moment. Sully had to break there because he got a message from presidential candidate Kennedy that he's going to be his vice president.
I'm not stealing Aaron Rodgers. He's the man. It's going to be Aaron, or maybe Kid Rock. We want to get political. Hey, Brian, I've got a good friend. His name's Bob Page. He's the CEO of the University of Kansas Health System. And I had a business radio show for many years, and I had him on. And so this topic goes way back. And I really wanted to figure out what's in the mind of a a healthcare CEO like him. And as it relates to, well, let's take one particular topic, the elderly, end of life. Okay. And what a struggle that is for everybody, right? An example may be my 90-year-old father-in-law, diagnosed with lung cancer. And you got a decision to make. Do you go in? Do you remove the tumor? But there's a pretty good chance he won't live through surgery. Who makes that call? Right now, as it happened, the surgery went through. It was paid for, and it wasn't. 5 days later, he's in palliative care, right? And he ends up dying. Now, I don't know what that cost. Right. But a decision had to be made by somebody. And I know Bob struggles with this, right? Is who can play God here? But there's an example of, you're trying to be objective, but how do you make decisions like that? And no doubt those are decisions that are made at Cigna.
Yeah, I think there are. I've seen, maybe I'd say it this way, in the 30 plus years I've been around, I have not specifically been drawn into any type of the press, right? I haven't been personally linked to Cigna said no, and it's because Brian said no.
Right.
You've got a massive societal issue that you brought up there that I could bring down to. I've personally lived it with my mother and my mother-in-law, the end of life as we've gone through. I have a 93-year-old Korean War veteran father-in-law who is pretty good, 93 kind of thing. And I've got an 84-year-old father. But you get into the societal view of, do we in fact take more of a humanitarian view of our pets than we do of our elderly, right? Especially as you get into some of that severe chronic pain towards end of life, and how do you treat it? It's pretty fascinating to me. I'd love to sit down and have a drink with Bob to see, again, as he gets exposed to more of the clinical side. But I guess I'd give it to you this way. There are coverage policies based on clinical evidence, the evidence-based measures that we incorporate that will dictate. I'm never one here to say, talking with my father just the other day, he has one of his good friends who is 101 years old. He still works out in the morning, and as my father describes him, he throws heavy weights around. He still rides his bike 15 to 17 miles when he goes out. That's 3 to 5 times a week. And he just went in for a routine physical, and through that routine exam, it was uncovered that one of the valves in his heart was 90% blocked. And I stepped back, put my carrier guy hat on for a second and said, boy, what's the end result here? Does 101 want to live forever? Because I don't think that's prudent. But to eliminate that blockage via stent and then an actual procedure, what's the value? How do you value a human life? Can he live to 102? Is he trying to get to 110? Is he trying to set a world record? I got to step back from that and say it is a big, big societal issue, cost of care at end of life, and bring it back down to, where is the coverage policy? We cover heart valve replacement. There is no real age restriction that's put on that, as far as I know. And again, I'm not the policy guy. That's a huge one. I don't know exactly where to go with that, other than I can reflect back about 4 years ago with my mom. It was she that sort of stood up and said, no more. And I had the extreme luxury of having one of the clinical docs that I work with every day who did me the professional courtesy and the human courtesy to say, Brian, you need to step back with your two brothers and your spouse and your dad, the spouse, and recognize that organs are starting to fail. Yes, there's always one more thing that a doctor is innately built to want to try, but to what value? And I guess maybe I'm still thankful today that my mom came back and said, no more. No more. I don't want to go through that or this. And we sort of proceeded to hospice right in that route. It's a huge one. And I don't really know how to undertake, but I would welcome a conversation to say.
Did he get the stint?
He is going forward with the stint. He absolutely is. It's next week, as a matter of fact. This is.
So do you think instead of using a traditional hospital gown, they'll just use his Superman cape to cover his ass?
I guess if they can pry sort of the armor off of them, but I don't know if you all give thought to it. I don't know if I see myself on this planet at 101. I'd like it to be for a few more years to enjoy maybe some of the golden years, but 101, man, that's something. That is,
it's funny. We have I'm not going to name their name because they don't advertise right now with me, but their tagline is "Motion is medicine." And it's so true. That guy stays in motion. My dad's 77 years old. He still walks 5 miles a day. He still gets up at 4 a.m. and works out. And he's in unbelievable shape. But it's because of how much he stays in motion. He's had both knees replaced. I mean, now granted, he's a 20-year lifer in the Marine Corps, so it's just built in him to do that.
Yep.
But given, Sully's last question, I'm going to go to something a little more positive. Let's talk about sustainability. Versus end of life. Do you guys have any initiatives around sustainability, and if so, kind of what are they?
Yeah, I could give maybe like one or two. It's another one of those topics. So I really like where you guys have covered. Man, we have sort of covered the gamut. But when I think about sustainability and the true the earmarks of that. We have an interesting one. I'll say it this way. While there's been a lot of carriers, like a Cigna who have been out there, we take a look at even the core of our operations. And you say from a sustainability, I come at it my wife is almost a tree hugger, doesn't want any more homes built in our community and that sort of thing. But if I come at it almost from that lens inside of sustainability, we combine that. At Cigna, we do have a digital first strategy, right? As I alluded to before, let's get as much information, good information, out to the consumer onto their cell phone, smartphone, whatever. I want you to have the power. Inside of that digital first strategy, there are things like, hey, do we print 16 million new ID cards every single year?
I got one in my wallet.
that have importance or not. And our strategy now, it's by exception only. My sales folks have to come in and say, we have a new group. We are a service-based organization. There is very little tangible evidence that we put out in terms of contract, et cetera, into the marketplace. One of the few tangible things that a Cigna customer gets from us is an ID card. But do you need to print an actual ID card, or can I just have an image of that on your My Cigna app, right, which is available to you 24/7, et cetera? So the just scratching of the surface, if I can eliminate cost from the system and the paper stock and printing charges and stamps, et cetera, I've now offended our federal letter carriers, our unionized machine shop guys who are sitting there in print, and I don't mean to, but sustainability can come down to things like, do we want to print ID cards when they are available on a website, on an app, anytime you want, absolutely through your phone, can be touched on and mailed right to an office? Do I need to have that card in my wallet? That's the first thing I think of from a sustainability standpoint. So there's a basic answer for you.
It's interesting. That's kind of what I thought you would go to, is like, we're, getting rid of the car, getting rid of all that plastic. And
well, if I think about it, 20 years ago, you had to, if you were onboarding a new group, you would go out and you would have enrollment meetings with the employees. I want to answer your questions, tell you a little bit about why Cigna is so great and the programs that are offered. But in that essence, we were around, hey, we've got to develop these open enrollment packets. It's going to have a summary of benefits in it, and a couple other pieces of paper that'll describe some programs that we think you'd be interested. And it needed to have a provider directory in it. Depending on your market, it could be 30 pages, it could be 100 pages. Well, they were out of date the second the ink dried on them, but everybody needed that directory. Just like one day not so long ago, we all needed to have a telephone book in our home. I just did some winter cleaning through the holidays this year, and I was throwing out, for my kids, they're a little bit older now, but we still had their elementary and high school directories from like 2008, 2004. And we kept them because you never knew when you'd need your neighbor's phone number. It's all out there electronically now. So that transformation inside of some of that sustainability effort is, boy, it's all out in a cloud or a data lake somewhere, right? All I need is that connectivity through my phone and I can get there. So why do I need something in my wallet or in my desk?
Hey, Brian, Sully's sitting on a Yellow Pages right now.
Yeah. I was going to say, my brand is George Costanza's Fat Wallet, Brian. So with sustainability, it comes fewer back problems and probably a little more style, but it would screw up my brand.
Yep, got it. I got it.
Sully, take us home, brother.
All right. Yeah. I'm not going to finish lightly here, Brian. Okay. Because I'm curious about this. What are you going to say? We're sitting at a bar, right? Me, you, and Scotty, we got a nice pint. We're up there in a nice bar in Hartford. And I say, hey, Bri, I got this cousin, and he's big on socialized medicine. He thinks we got to bring the whole system is whacked out, Bri. We need socialized medicine. What would you say that I should say to my cousin?
Yeah, so maybe again, just a quantifying socialized medicine. Let's open it up for all, sort of like a non-U.S. delivery of care. Let's think about the way things are done in Europe and in other countries. It's definitely the right spot to probably open up that conversation. I naturally go to sort of the defensive side of things. So I think we have good healthcare in the U.S. There are any number of people who are probably more well-educated than I am on the quality of care, the efficacy of care in the way that it's delivered in the United States versus others. I'm just a little bit biased, and I'm not going to go to Canada or Mexico to get my drugs. I'm going to get them here. I believe in the U.S. system. Socialized medicine brings on a couple of things. So socialized medicine, I think, would have more of an impact. What I'd want to bring a physician into one of those bar stools. Will that physician, let's just live in an easy stereotype, and I don't mean to be taking a shot here, but medical doctors, medical professionals in the United States can enjoy a nice lifestyle commensurate with the services that they provide. That's not always the case in other countries. So if we think about second homes and club memberships and boats and a middle class, upper middle class lifestyle, I'd want a physician to sit next to me, because more typically what I get in this socialized medicine front is I have any number of friends that are doctors. Most interesting recent conversation was with a radiologist, and we'll save that for another show. But those doctors typically say to me, hey, Brian, my reimbursements from carriers for what I do have gone down 10%, 30% over the last 1 to 3 years. And we'll have that conversation right before we have the conversation around, well, it is March the 26th. I got to get down to the shoreline and open up my beach house next week. And so serious but lighthearted at the same time. I think there's a paradigm shift inside of it. Happy to have the conversation. But if we think it's just about removing the cost and the profits that the insurance companies are out there and everything else stays the same. I haven't even gotten into what are the wait times for elective procedures in the UK, et cetera. It's a great conversation to have over a pint because usually I could buy the first round and there's a few more rounds needed in through that overall discussion.
Yeah. Well, and to go back to my buddy Bob, he even says, it drives me a little nuts that I am tasked with taking, and I think he came up with some crazy number of what he had to take out of his hospital cost-wise last year. And he said, we can't be the only ones shouldering this. He said, when I see these medical guys show up in their Mercedes and they got their club memberships and they get... It can't all be on our backs as the healthcare system. It's got to be on everybody's backs. And, he's by nature, he's a CPA, so he didn't even come up clinical, but he's such a great man. And it really drives him nuts, right? But to your point, for us to get great talent, again, we're probably on our 6th pint of Guinness at this point. But if we're going to incentivize people to go to med school, to your point, Scotty, to spend 15, hours a day hustling, working your tail off, there's got to be a reward. For one, you got to be able to pay your bills back. And number two, you got to be rewarded for it. So, there's so many things to it. How do you pull cost out of the system? It's a tough one. Well, all we can do is keep trying. And in many of the companies we work with, Brian, as we try to help them with their messaging, right? When you sit down with somebody, you may have the coolest new technology, but maybe Cigna's not going to pay for it. Well, you're not. You better go sell Cigna. You better sell those physicians sitting in that health services room, right? You better have the data behind you. It better produce better outcomes, but at the same time, it has to consider removing costs from the system, right? So you do have to be the best of everything now, I think, to get into these systems and to get approval from you. And we have a hard time with many of our clients who say, "Look at this thing. Look, we've got the data, but would you help us sell it?" And we say, "Well, it ain't reimbursed, brother. This is going to be hard," right? Yep. Scotty, you see it?
Yeah, I would add two things to that. One, kind of to Brian's point, I don't want the guy opening up my chest working at a discount. Pay him. I want him to be highly educated and be the best of the best. And two, I mentioned earlier, we host, I don't know, so it might have been when you were off, but we host several meetings a year with supply chain folks, and they do talk about costs out of the system. But I will say in the last 2 to 3 years, we've seen a shift from those guys to wanting to beat the manufacturers up on the price of their product to how do we work better operationally to take cost out of the system, where, hey, we stop shipping us on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Our dock isn't open on those days. Ship us Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And those are conversations that typically a sales guy's not going to have. You need ops talking to ops on it and pulling costs out of the system. And then, you come back to better patient outcomes so that you don't have patients coming back into the system. So there's all kinds of ways around taking costs out of the system. But I agree with you. I think, health systems are under tremendous pressure from a cost standpoint. From a supply standpoint. And then the biggest one, I think, is from just staffing. Getting staff is a huge issue for them as well. But Brian, it was so great to talk to you today, man. I appreciate the conversation. Sorry we had the little hiccup there with IT. I'll talk to him afterwards.
Yeah, that's okay. If I left you with one thing, so these are conversations that I don't try and skirt. I actually welcome them. So I'd say it this way, Brian, if I'm ever in the area, I'd love to meet up with Bob, right? If Bob's the CPA that you say he is, then I could start with sort of the challenge statement. Why can't you just create an overall revenue and expense model that's based on Medicare reimbursement? This will be a step off for our next show. That's such an unfair, right? This is the quintessential cost shift. Medicare, the government, if you will, only reimburses a little, and that's why commercial insurance is out there, and that's where the margin has to be made. I get that. But there's one or two forward-thinking delivery system CEOs that are out there saying, reimagine the world. If we can reimagine taxi service being provided by an entity that doesn't own a single vehicle or a single taxi cab driver, and we call that Uber or Lyft, then maybe there is a way to reimagine healthcare financing, and that's not to the hospital. Mm-hmm. But Bob and his challenges, we are short something around, right, the great resignation that we went through COVID. Healthcare professionals were on the front lines every single day. And if we can't respect that, and the fact that here we are in a post-pandemic or endemic world, 200,000 plus nurses short on where we need to be in this country. I mean, these are real issues. And I'd welcome a pint with Bob on that to see where his thoughts are. We've got to get at it and tackle it together.
Well, maybe we'll just play a round of golf first. Then we'll have you on the golf underground. We'll tell you, right? I mean, we've had the stodgy business, healthcare conversation. Now, can we talk some fun? Maybe over on the other side. Welcome. And then we'll go have a pint, Scotty. We'll all right.
I love it.
We'll have George Brett be our fourth. How's that? All right.
CPG.
Awesome. CPG. Well, CPG. All right, Brian, thank you so much. And hey, listen, for all those companies out there, you got insurance companies, you got a whole bunch of insurance companies. I think you got to go with Cigna. It's just my take. All right. Just my take. All right. So, hey, would you come back and join us? Because, I think we do this forever.
Yep. Sounds good. Sounds good.
Right.
Pleasure, guys. Have fun.
Brian Cuddeback from
thank you.
Cigna Healthcare VP. Check him out. Link up with him on LinkedIn. He probably won't accept you if you're going to try to sell him something, but wouldn't kill you to try. All right. You listen to The Cure with Scotty and Sully.